Welcome back to part 8 of the Cune portfolio tasting with their portfolio manager. If you missed the earlier part, go back to my playlist and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe to www.angiesound.com so you don't ever miss a new video just like this. Let's get to it.
This is completely different. Okay, now we're getting to the real good stuff. So this is your flagship.
Yes. Exactly. So Imperial, it's Cune's flagship. You know, they only produce Imperial Reserva and Gran Reserva. It's not released every year. It's only released in exceptional years. And Imperial was actually #1 from Wine Spectator a few years ago from the top 100 list. So it was the first time a Spanish wine made it to #1.
Yes.
Now there are two. I think last year or the year before there was another winery from Spain, another winery from Rioja actually that made it to #2. But Imperial was the first one. So that also really helped, you know, to get like a strong following here in the US. They already had it, but you know, that kind of like speed it up. So as I said, they only do Reserva and Gran Reserva only in exceptional years. All the fruit comes from Rioja Alta. It comes from 3 different plots in the Rioja Alta subregion of Tempranillo, Graciano, Mazuelo, and Garnacha, old vines, bush vines, and the fruit is blended from those 3 plots. Every year the blend might change slightly,
right?
In the sense of like what plot it's being used the most, right? But the blend in terms of variety, it's pretty much the same every year, mostly Tempranillo. This is the wine where we see 100% new oak, French and American oak. We see a little bit over 24 months, and then, you know, a little bit over 4 years in the bottle before it gets released from the winery.
So are both these bottles sourced from the same 3 block, or this one's from the 3 and this
they're
one's
different?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is part of the what we would say the Cune lineup.
Got it.
Imperial, it comes from very different plots. Specific 3 plots. And to your point, I like to always make the difference because people, well, these are both Gran Reserva, right?
Yes.
And they're both aged in oak for at least 24 months. They're both aged for at least 5 years in total. Now Imperial is double the price. Yeah. Okay. So this is something very important to think in Rioja, because people say, oh, I've seen a Reserva that is cheaper than yours, or a Gran Reserva that is more expensive than yours, and it's a Gran Reserva, so I'm just going to go for that Gran Reserva. Well, the Crianza Reserva and Gran Reserva, they talk about aging, but they don't talk necessarily about quality. Okay? Yes. So the fact I can produce a Gran Reserva, but I can produce a Gran Reserva with really old vines, or with very young vines. I can produce a Gran Reserva from bush vines with dry farming, or from a very large plot with, you know, very young vines where I use, you know, irrigation.
Is it allowed?
You can.
It is? Okay.
I can age my wine for, you know, 2 years in oak, in new oak, or I can age it in very old used barrels. Okay, so even though Crianza Reserva and Gran Reserva, they all across Rioja are going to be aged for the same minimum amount of time, it doesn't necessarily speak about the quality of the wine. Okay, and that's again something important to not forget, because there are many wineries that are very large wineries that produce millions of bottles every year, and they have Gran Reservas, but they can be the same price as a Reserva from Cune or from another winery. So that's, you know, always something to keep in mind. And there is no way to know but to ask, you know, whoever is selling you the wine.
So I asked whoever actually really knows about the wine, and I just rephrase it.
Exactly.
So production-wise, what are we talking about over on the Gran Reserva side for both of them? Because when you say you guys don't produce nearly as much, so how much?
Oh yeah, so for Imperial, we're talking about 3,000 bottles.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, of Imperial Gran Reserva. And then Cune Gran Reserva, we're talking about 10,000, 15,000 bottles.
Jesus.
So it's a big, you see there's a big difference. Huh?
Huge
and they're both Gran Reserva.
Yes, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, Imperial, it's a very small, it's a small project. I mean, I don't have a picture with me, but it's interesting because when people come to the winery, they're like, this is it? This is Imperial? I'm like, yeah. Because they see the Imperial cellar and they see the barrels aging. And that's where we say, well, this is where Imperial ages. And people are like,
it's like 2 barrels.
Yeah, well, not 2 barrels, but yeah, you know, you see the room and you're like, this is all the Imperial? And you're like, yeah, this is all the Imperial. And to tell a story, the Imperial cellar at the Cune winery, it's its own, its own cellar, separated from Cune, and it was built in the early 1900s by the same studio of Gustav Eiffel, who did the Eiffel Tower.
What?
So this gives you an idea of how wealthy the 5-6 families that started Rioja back in the late 1800s, they were.
Yes.
Imagine this family going to the guy that built the Eiffel Tower saying, well, hey, you build the Eiffel Tower, can you come and build me a cellar at my new winery? So it was pretty impressive. So to this day is what they use to age Imperial.
Wow.
Imperial, both Reserva and Gran Reserva.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm so glad I didn't dump this Gran Reserva out because it was so good, and I grabbed a new glass for the Imperial because now I get to smell them side by side. They're both, it's like a progression. It's like it's building up. It's absolutely amazing and very, very different. And I absolutely can see why this was ranked as the #1 wine in the world by Wine Spectator, because it smells and tastes like it.
To me, I've been in the States since 2008, and I always say that when I'm homesick, I always open a bottle of Imperial because I close my eyes and it's 100% Rioja, it's 100% Spain. Like it cannot trick you. Like this is, it's a textbook, classic Rioja.
Yes.
And that to me, it's so important nowadays because wineries are changing a lot, and wineries are adapting their wines to the market they're going to, and they're changing their and things are changing. But to me, to be able to have a wine that that reminds me of home, that it smells like home, it's really important.
It really is.
Yeah, it's a classic in Rioja.
It's a very, very, very classic, but very refined classic. Because like from a sommelier's perspective, we're taught to blind taste a Rioja by the American oak, and the American oak sometimes can be a little more aggressive, like that, and that stands out. So that's why, at least for me, I'm always like, oh, it's easy to pick out. But in this one, it's very elegant and very sophisticated. So it's not just like, boom, there's the oak, and you're like hitting you over the face, and you're like, oh, that's a Rioja. But no, it's like well balanced, very well made, and I'm actually seeing more dark fruit in there. There's a little bit of that mineral driven thing going on. It's almost like a little bit of that dusty and dark cherry thing happening in the backdrop. And I mean, it's classic Rioja, but I'm starting to see the same, like in Limerick, for people who may not be familiar with Reserva, this is like it reminisces of certain Bordeaux wine in that kind of style, if that makes sense. But it's still, the fruit in there is definitely the Tempranillo style. But
well, that's Rioja winemakers, they learn from
the French,
in Bordeaux, no? I mean, that's how Rioja started. When the French didn't have any wine, the phylloxera had already killed their vineyards, and they were coming down to Rioja to buy wine and bring it to Bordeaux and be able to label it and sell it.
Nice.
So we really learn from them on how to make wine. So for sure, some Imperial, Cune, wineries that have been there for a long time, their premium wines, it will remind you of Bordeaux a lot.
It's beautiful. Love that wine.
Thank you for watching part 8. Don't forget to subscribe to angiesound.com to get all the latest wine deal and wine videos in the future.